It's the end of the first week of free agency in the NFL. What have the Jets done right? What have the Jets done wrong? We're going to talk about it on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, March 18th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, click that subscribe button, and you'll be notified as new episodes are posted each day. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a thumbs up. It helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Well, Thursday was very quiet in free agency for the New York Jets. It's kind of funny because Thursday was the first full official day of free agency in the NFL, yet it feels like most of the big moves are done. There are still some players out there, but free agency kind of unofficially began on Monday with the beginning of the legal tampering period. Tuesday was also the legal tampering period. Wednesday, the league year began at 4, so all of those moves you heard about could become official. And Thursday was the first really full 24-hour day where teams could operate in free agency officially, but really things have been going all week. So kind of a funny situation, and the Jets, a team that had been very active through the first 3 days of free agency, really were not very active on Thursday. But this gives us a chance to kind of look at what the Jets have done so far. Today we're going to talk about what they've done well, what they have not done well, and we'll also talk about where things may be going moving forward in this offseason. And, I have to tell you, I'm not somebody who's going to, give the Jets, an A+ for every single move that they make. And I'm also not going to give the Jets, an F for every single move that they make. It's not realistic to expect the Jets to hit on every single one of these moves. So, I see people out there saying, the Jets have added all these great players, and, well, the objective is not to bat 1,000. The objective is to find enough players who outperform their contracts, guys who are good fits, guys who fit your system well, guys who are going to produce for you. But you're never going to bat 1,000. If you bat 1,000, you've had the best offseason of any team in the league, and that's very difficult to do. And it's not a requirement to have a successful offseason. So with that in mind, this is I'm not going to go here and say every move the Jets made is an A+ move. It's probably not. There are probably going to be some moves the Jets made that will not work out. That's almost a guarantee. The question is, did they hit on enough? And that's something we'll find out in the fall. And all I can really talk about is the mindset behind the moves that they made right now. So what are some of the good things that have come from free agency? Well, the first good thing I'll say is that there's no contract that jumps out to me as obviously terrible. And that's a departure from Jets free agency in the recent past. Because, there have been some just horrific deals that they've made that I've hated immediately. Trumaine Johnson, I hated that contract from day one. C.J. Mosley, C.J. Mosley's a good player, but he was a better player in Baltimore at the time the Jets signed him. But I saw that, I was like, that's ridiculous money. And so there's no Christian Kirk deal. Christian Kirk's deal with Jacksonville's absurd. Giving that guy over $20 million a year. Not a bad player, but just a ridiculous contract. So, I look at this, and maybe there's a contract or two where I say, it's a little too much money for that guy. C.J. Uzomah is a good example. But there's nothing I look at and say, that's just a horrendous deal. There's no way that could possibly work out. So, I think that's a good thing. And I think, in free agency, one of the biggest risks is you get carried away, especially in the early stages. And you decide, well, we have to get this guy. And you start bidding against yourself. And we've seen the Jets do that plenty of times. So, fortunately, we've kind of avoided that this year. And that's one of the things that, it's almost impossible to, quote-unquote, win free agency when you're bidding against yourself and you're just throwing money nonstop at the top guys and you reset. It's not so much, and I know the Jets have been aggressive, but I have not seen the Jets reset the market at a position for a guy who's not a premium player. That's different from what the Jets have done. The Jets have been aggressive and spent money, but they have not given out a crazy deal. There's no deal that I look at immediately and say there's no chance of that working out. So that's a positive right there. Another thing that I like is it does feel like there's a plan. You're starting to see a plan come into focus here. You're beginning to understand what the Jets want to do on offense. They're getting guys that they think can fit their systems. And again, that's something the Jets haven't done in the past always. You look at the tight end position where they added C.J. Uzomah, who they think, and listen, they may be wrong. There have been plenty of times over the last few years where the Jets thought a player would be a better fit in their system, and it hasn't worked out. Jared Davis was a perfect example of a guy the Jets were trying to sell us last year. He'd be a better fit in their system than he was in Detroit's system. It didn't work out. So it comes down to whether or not you're able to execute the plan, but it's good that like you've gotten guys who fit what you want to do. Laken Tomlinson on offense comes from San Francisco, which is a similar system to what the Jets run. DJ Reed coming over from Seattle, playing corner in a system similar to what the Jets run. It feels like they're going for guys who are kind of scheme fits. And beyond that, I think another thing that's a positive for the Jets, as you look at what they've done in free agency, is that they've focused on filling some positions that maybe aren't as deep in the draft. And the positions that are still unfilled, you look at wide receiver maybe you look at defensive line, both defensive end and defensive tackle. These are positions that, generally speaking, are fairly deep in the 2022 NFL draft. So they're heading into the draft, and it's always a risky strategy to go into the draft thinking we're going to draft a player at this position. You have to kind of pick your spots, especially when you have as many holes as the Jets have had this past offseason. But they're going in knowing that there are going to be a lot of different options at the positions that they haven't yet filled. And I think that, again, that's another positive you can take from this. And beyond that, I mean, I think in general, and I hesitate to say this because I haven't seen any studies on this, but it's my perception, and I've looked into this a little bit. The positions that the Jets have tried to fill in free agency are some of what are generally considered the lower value positions outside of DJ Reed. You're talking Laken Tomlinson at guard. Guard's not really a high valued position in the NFL, relatively speaking. You look at the tight end position, again, not a position that's really viewed as a tremendous value position. They get Uzomah and Conklin, a pair of guys at those positions, two guys who, again, also kind of fit what they're trying to do, because you're going to see a lot of double tight end sets. That's what Mike LaFleur wants to run. So again, another example of guys who fit what they want to do. But you look at the defensive side of the ball, signing Whitehead from Tampa Bay, a safety. So it feels like they're kind of focused on the positions that maybe don't get as much money in general, and can be easier to find, because one of the difficult parts of free agency in the NFL, and this is like specific to the NFL, it's not true in really any other sport. The best guys in the NFL don't hit the market. The LeBron Jameses, the Kevin Durants, they don't hit the market in the NFL the way they do in the NBA. Those guys are either signed, and if they change teams, it's usually through a trade, as we saw again last night with Devontae Adams. If you want a guy who makes a genuine difference, if you want a guy who changes your team, you're probably going to have to draft him. But if you're not going to draft him, you're probably going to have to trade for him. So free agency is a good spot where you can make a lot of mistakes paying a guy to be a game-changing player when he's not. So you have to kind of pick your spots a little bit better. But who are the guys who do get to free agency? Well, a good team has to prioritize. So they'll typically prioritize positions that are viewed as more important. And I'm talking quarterback, I'm talking receiver, I'm talking tackle, I'm talking corner, I'm talking defensive end or outside line, but whatever you would like to call an edge rusher. So the guys who do hit free agency who make a difference, sometimes they're the guys who play the lower value positions, because a better team has to prioritize. They have lots of good players. We can't keep them all. So we're going to prioritize the guys who play the high value positions. That's where an opportunity could exist for a team like the Jets. So I think you can see a plan here. Whether or not they're able to pull off the plan, well, that's a different story. But you've got guys who kind of fit the system. You've got a focus on the positions that aren't as deep in the draft, so that way you can draft positions where there's more depth. And aside from DJ Reed, who I think was a decent side, kind of an upside play, you have guys you signed from maybe the lower value positions where it's easier to hit in free agency. So these things all come into play. And I'm going to give one last thing that I like, and I think this is something in general. And this is in part, and this was not a comprehensive study, but a few weeks back I looked at like 10 years of every significant Jets free agent signing, and I wrote an article over at gangreennation.com for it. And one of the things that I found was like, it was amazing how much lower the hit rate was for the Jets over the last decade when they signed players who were 29 years old and older. So you want to focus on younger players. And if you look at the important Jets signings, there's more guys 25, 26 than there are guys who are older than that. I mean, you look at Reed and Whitehead. Reed, the corner from Seattle, they signed. Whitehead, the safety from Tampa, they signed. Both 25. You look at Conklin, the tight end from Minnesota, 26. Martin, the defensive end from the Texans, 26. Even Laken Tomlinson, a guy who's pushing 30 in the 30 range. That's a position where players age a little bit better, and that's another thing you have to consider is that the aging curve is different across positions. 27 is pretty old for a running back, but it's not old at other positions. And a guy who's 30 at guard probably has a few good years left in him. And really, the only guy who seemed kind of disproportionately old for his position was Uzama, CJ Uzama, who the Jets signed from the Bengals, and that was one of those spots where it kind of felt like the Jets were so weak at tight end that they kind of had to disregard stuff. And that's one that, honestly was probably an overpay, but I understand why they overpaid CJ Uzama. We'll see how well it works out, but that was really the only situation where I think the Jets really kind of disregarded the normal rules you see for success. So I think that, generally speaking, if you're a Jets fan, I think there's reason for cautious optimism. You never know how these guys are going to fit. In theory, these moves all made sense. Will they all work out? Well, of course, they won't all work out. You just hope that enough of them worked out, and you hope that with good process comes results. And that's all you can. Good in the NFL. Bad process almost guarantees that you'll have a bad result over the long run. And maybe you have a bad process and you just get lucky for a year or two, or maybe because of your bad process, you're focused on the short term. And it improves you in the short term. Good process does not guarantee good results, but it's one of those things that you need good process to have good results over the long run. While it doesn't guarantee it, it's one of those things that's kind of essential to have positive results. And I think the process here, there's a lot that makes sense for the Jets. So is it a perfect free agency period? No. Can you be optimistic as a Jets fan? I would say yes. But as I said, it's not been a perfect free agency period. I do have a few issues with the way the Jets have done things, and I'm going to talk about some of those issues and explain why I feel that way ahead here on this Friday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. Of course, we're focused on free agency for the Jets right now. The draft is right around the corner in a few weeks, but we're still months away from the beginning of the 2022 NFL season. However, it is tournament time in college basketball. I'm not sure if you watched yesterday, an incredible game. We had a local heartbreak on Wednesday night as Rutgers fell to Notre Dame in the first 4 game in double overtime. Well, last night we had a tremendous victory for a local team as St. Peter's upset Kentucky, a 15-2 upset. Amazing victory for St. Peter's. Congratulations to them. And you should know that as you watch the tournament, from all the latest odds, contests, and player props, that betonline.net is the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day, and make sure you're following Locked On NFL. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And today we're talking about the early stages of free agency for the Jets, talking about some of the good things, some of the things that I don't love so much, and this is the negative section. This is the point where I talk about the things that I don't like. And listen, I don't hate what the Jets have done. So there have been years where, if you've listened to this podcast, you know that I've absolutely hated what the Jets have done. This is not so much a hate segment as it is I don't love what they're doing. I don't love the direction of this. And I'd have to begin at the wide receiver position. And in this segment, I've kind of talked about these things over the last couple of days, so I'll try and not go on too long. I think what the Jets are doing at wide receiver makes sense in like a neutral situation. If you're just like a general NFL team, I can understand what the Jets are doing at wide receiver. You could talk yourself into Corey Davis. You can say, well, Elijah Moore may break out. You could say, well, Berrios had a good year last year. Well, we've got 2 top 10 picks. We'll draft somebody. And that all makes sense in theory for like a general NFL team. But in practice, like this is a really important year for Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson really struggled last year. And I feel like you got to do everything in your power to make sure Zach Wilson's successful. And I'm a big Elijah Moore fan, but the way the Jets are setting this thing up, it's pretty much like Elijah Moore's got to develop into a #1 receiver and stay healthy this year. Or if that doesn't happen, wide receiver is going to be an issue. He's got to be like a 1,200-yard receiver based on the way the Jets are playing this. I know you could say they draft somebody, but there's like one receiver a year who goes for 1,000 yards as a rookie over the last decade. It's a lot to ask. I mean, maybe you get lucky, or that's the other option is you get lucky with a receiver. But if either of those things don't happen, you haven't given Zach Wilson the number one receiver. And beyond that, like I feel like you gotta, or I'm not saying they needed to, but it really would have helped to have a veteran receiver because you've got young talent in Moore, and you still could have drafted somebody if you got a veteran receiver. But I want somebody who knows what they're doing, somebody who understands what to do when there's a blitz, somebody who knows where to line up, and somebody who I just feel like you want a nice balance of young promise and veteran savvy. And we talked the other day. On Monday. I talked about Amari Cooper, and Jets weren't interested in him. Of course, last night Davante Adams gets traded to the Raiders, and listen. I don't know if the Jets could have traded for Davante Adams. It may well have been a situation where he was set on going to the Raiders, but it didn't seem like there was much urgency. It didn't seem like the Jets really even had interest. And I don't think Davante Adams, I know it's a big price, but you also have to remember what you're getting for that price. You're getting a guy who's averaged almost 100 yards a game the last 2 years. I understand with Aaron Rodgers, but the guy who changes everything. And there aren't many players in the NFL who change everything about your offense. And he is pushing 30, but again, what are the Jets' needs right now? They may be a team that's building for the future, but they have a quarterback who needs results right now. And I don't know that they've done what they need to do to help Zach Wilson out. I think it's a situation where if you had a veteran quarterback, if you had a guy who was established, I think you could argue that this makes sense. And listen, it still could work out. Elijah Moore could develop into that receiver. I think Elijah Moore has got a shot to do it. It's just more a question of, is this my only option? And I don't really think the Jets are in. It seems to me like, based on the lack of interest in Cooper and the lack of interest in Davante Adams, it doesn't really feel like the Jets have any interest in adding a veteran receiver. And I don't know that I agree with that approach. I want a proven guy. I want a guy you plug in right there, and you can count on him to get 1,000 yards. I think that would be really significant for Zach Wilson. I think if that happens, then you've done everything you can to help Zach Wilson out. And for where things stand right now, I think that they're taking a risk that they don't need. It's not so much that it's a bad decision. It's a risk that doesn't need to be taken. Because, even if you go out and get an established guy and Elijah Moore breaks out, like, that's not a problem. That's a really good thing. Then you got even more matchup problems for the defense. And yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, I don't even know who's out there now. I mean, maybe the Texans will trade Brandon Cooks. He could be an option. On the lower end of the scale, there's now talk with Allen Robinson with the Rams. Maybe Robert Woods is on the market, which, I mean, I don't know that he's of that caliber that I'm looking for. So it feels like the Jets just aren't interested in adding a veteran receiver. I mean, I get the idea, like, you want to be young. I get the idea of building through. I'm a big fan of building through the draft. But I question this approach. I question whether or not this is the right way for the Jets to go. And then that brings me to my second critique, which is not really related, but I just don't understand why the Jets are bringing back so many of these backups from the 2021 team. And they're paying above the minimum for these guys. And we talked about Connor McDermott. We've talked about Dan Feeney I did not dislike, but Joe Flacco coming back. This was a team that did not have good depth last year. And they're bringing back a lot of depth players who just aren't that great. Now, I like Tevin Coleman. I like the Tevin Coleman signing. I think him as a number 3 back is perfectly fine, but you got to focus on depth a little bit more. And I did like, again, I like the signing of Martin from Houston. He helps the depth a little bit. I think he'll probably be a reserve, assuming the Jets draft somebody in the first round at the edge rusher spot. But I don't love the moves the Jets are making as far as depth goes. So that would be my second critique. I don't love what they're doing from that standpoint. Well, as we close things out on today's episode of Locked On Jets, I'll leave some final thoughts about where the Jets can go from here, what other moves can be made this offseason. That's ahead on this Friday episode. Of course, as you watch the NCAA tournament today, you may be looking for a great snack, and let me suggest Built Bar, which is the best tasting protein bar on the market. Yes, it's a protein bar, but it does not taste like one. These bars are covered in 100% chocolate, and not only that, they're not bad for you. They're 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein in most bars. Compare that to a candy bar, which has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. And beyond that, they are delicious, as I mentioned. 100% chocolate. I remember when I was a kid, I was once at a store and I saw this bar that looked like chocolate, and it was a protein bar. It tastes horrible. That's not what Built Bar actually does taste like a candy bar. And there are so many delicious flavors. You got mint brownie, you got coconut, you got coconut almond. You also have white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time because if they think a flavor might be good, they'll make it. It'll be delicious, and it will be good for you. So go to built.com to check out all the different options you have for Built Bars. Again, that's built.com, BUILT.com for delicious Built Bars. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. We're talking about what the Jets have done in the early stages of free agency. In the first segment, I talked about some of the things that I think are positive. In the second segment, I talked about some of the things I disagree with what the Jets are doing. In this segment, I'm going to talk about what remains for the rest of the offseason. Now, free agency is not going to be over for the Jets, but it definitely feels like things are slowing down, not only for the Jets, but for the NFL in general. And I think if you'll see signings continue in the weeks ahead, but signings are going to continue into the summer, and they're going to become much more sporadic. It'll be the weeks of no news, and then, well, this player signed somewhere. There's players who are coming off injury who want to be able to show teams that they're healthy, or teams might be waiting to see that they're healthy before they sign a one-year deal. There's always that one guy out there who projects to get a big contract in free agency, then his agent completely overplays their hand, and the player ends up waiting until the summer and signing a cheap one-year deal to reassert their market value for the next year. So there's always that guy out there. So you'll continue to see free agent signings, and of course now our focus is going to turn to the draft in the next week or two. That's when the focus will be. It's pro day season. It's upcoming. It's coming to the point where teams will start having players in for visits. I'm not sure how they're doing it this year. I don't know whether they're going to go virtual and do Zoom calls or whether they're going to actually have players come into the team facility. Not sure whether that's been announced yet, but we'll start focusing on the draft. And for the Jets, I think the remaining needs are pretty clear. You got wide receiver, which I just talked about, and my hunch is that it's going to be more in the draft. I think 4 or 10 is probably going to be where you see the Jets take a receiver. Defensive line needs some work. I mean, you still need another edge rusher to go across from Carl Lawson, who's returning from injury. I think Martin helps. The guy they got from Houston, he'll help, but I think he's more of a depth guy. I view him as more like the Vinny Curry guy, who the Jets thought they were getting this year before Vinny Curry got hurt and never played for the Jets. Defensive tackle, I think they could use a little bit extra depth. I mean, listen, defensive tackle, how can you not say they need extra depth when they're bringing back Nathan Shepard? They're so desperate at defensive tackle, they brought Nathan Shepard back. Speaking of depth guys that I don't understand why the Jets brought back, Nathan Shepard would clearly be one of those. So, there's still some positions of need. I think running back after Michael Carter, I still think you got Michael Carter as your top guy. You got Tevin Coleman as kind of the veteran who gets a couple touches a game, goes in maybe in passing situations. If somebody suffers an injury, goes in for a week or two. But still need that guy to pair with Michael Carter. And beyond that, I mean, I would say linebacker. It sounds like the Jets love their linebackers, though. I don't hate the Jets linebackers, but I don't love the Jets linebackers. I think they could use an upgrade. I don't think that that's going to happen. So I guess we're going to have Quincy Williams and C.J. Mosley back next year. So those are the big needs, and you'll see the Jets. I think the Jets may make some depth signings. Hopefully they improve the depth, because stop bringing back these guys who aren't any good, who were on the team last year. Hopefully they make some better depth signings along the way, maybe improve a few positions. I think you've seen improvement, though, this offseason, and the focus will now turn to the draft. And that's where the Jets hope to really build this thing up. And we'll see what Joe Douglas has in store. But for today, that's all. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoy the show, subscribe to it. Leave it a good review if you're listening on a podcast source. Thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. And have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday to talk more Jets.